I've seen so many companies that have invested heavily in sales and outbound and cold calling, cold sales. And, it never works. They never really get the results that they want. And if you're only focused on the bottom of the funnel, then you have nothing feeding the top and the middle, so nothing actually gets to the bottom. Just like a funnel, if you don't put water in at the top, nothing's going to come out at the bottom. It's always true that you should invest in your marketing before you invest in your sales, and by investing in your marketing, the sales will come.
Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Hub podcast, the podcast for all things B2B SaaS marketing, brought to you by marketing agency Advance B2B. I'm your host, Clément René, and today we'll talk about something every SaaS company kinda has to go through: go-to-market strategy, or GTM. At its core, a go-to-market strategy is a plan to launch a product or service in the market, targeting the right audience with the right message. See it as a blueprint for how you'll engage your customers and beat the competition. I know it sounds pretty straightforward, but it's anything but. Why is it so difficult? Well, because in the fast-paced and ever-evolving landscape we evolve in, a one-size-fits-all approach does not cut it anymore. And some companies also struggle with GTM because they may underestimate the complexity of aligning their marketing, their sales, their product, and their customer success. And at the end of the day, dealing with market demands, changing customer preferences, and competition means your GTM plan has to be both dynamic and rock solid. In today's episode, you'll hear from Kathryn Strachan, founder and CEO of CopyHouse, a UK-based content marketing agency that recently successfully entered the US without a US team. I'm recording this intro a little bit after the actual recording with Kathryn, and so you'll probably notice an outfit change if you're watching on YouTube, because yes, we're also on YouTube at the Growth Hub podcast, and maybe my voice will also sound different because, well, I've been battling with a little bit of a cough for about a month now. But anyway, I'm recording this now that the episode is in the bank, so I can tell you that Kathryn will spill the beans on CopyHouse's GTM playbook, how to enter a country without a dedicated team, whether marketing or sales should come first, or how they had to rework messages that actually resonated in the UK, but not in the US. So let's dive in episode 105 of the Growth Hub podcast with Kathryn Strachan, founder and CEO of CopyHouse. Well, hello, Kathryn, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yay! Well, I briefly introduced you, but can you tell us a bit more about you?
Absolutely. So I am Kathryn Strachan. I am the owner and CEO of CopyHouse. CopyHouse is a content marketing agency that specializes in complex industries. So most of our clients are in the B2B space, but that's across financial services, insurance, healthcare, technology. And what we do is we do content marketing. So we help companies to define their core messaging, understand their audience, what their audience needs to hear and wants to hear from the brand, and how they can ultimately build stronger relationships. We then use those insights paired with competitor analysis to create a strategy. Once a strategy is in place, we do content production. So we do copywriting, design, and social media. So copywriting, we do ebooks and white papers. We do really technical thought leadership. We do a lot of SEO blog content and product marketing. We can design everything that we write. So we design the ebooks and white papers and the infographics. And then the other thing we do is B2B social. So we create executive profiles as well as company accounts, primarily on LinkedIn, but that's creating all the content and publishing all the content and then helping to grow those communities. So I built the agency from just myself to 25 people in the last 4 years. It's been a really fast-paced growth journey. Part of that growth has involved expanding into the US as well. I'm also involved with a number of things outside of CopyHouse. So I act as a fractional CMO and do some consulting work outside of it, which I really enjoy. It allows me to keep my hands dirty. I have a book, so I'm going to be a published author very soon. So I have a book coming out called Scaling Success, Building Brands That Break Barriers. I also host my own podcast called Tech Marketers Uncorked. So I do a number of things outside of CopyHouse that really keep my brain fresh and that I really enjoy doing. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
So there was so much that we could have covered today, and your successful US entry market started Q2, Q3 last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's something I really wanted to hear more about, but there are so many marketing agencies in the world, and especially in the US. So why try to enter the US?
Well, I'm from the US originally. So I grew up in the US until I was about 22. And then I moved to the UK I'm not thinking my age away, around 10 years ago to be with my husband. So I am a native in both markets. I understand the US market intrinsically. I mean, it's in my blood, but I understand the UK market as well because I've spent most of my adult life here. So I know both markets really well. And about 18 months ago, when the economy in the UK started to slow down a bit and, we were starting to face a recession, I had to look at, how we were going to survive that and how we were going to thrive that. And I started to realize that expanding into a new market would increase the pool of prospects, potential clients that we could have without needing to change our value proposition. So the only way for an agency to really expand is to add new services, to focus on new industries, or to cover new markets. CopyHouse, we've always specialized in complex industry. So that's always been our strength, that we've had a really clear proposition of what we do and who we are. So I didn't want to mess with that. So I didn't want to change the industry. We have 3 core services, and that feels like enough to, cater to our audience's needs, but also in terms of a marketing, because, the more services you have, the more marketing you really need to do. So I didn't want to change our services or expand those either. So what I saw as an opportunity was to expand internationally. So to expand into the US. The US was a natural choice. I mean, I already had a network there via Chiefs and, via a lot of the networking that I was doing. And it was a market that I knew really well. I think it's very difficult to expand into a market that you don't know very well. So I was playing to my strengths in that decision. And yeah, it's been a really good move. I mean, it's not without its challenges for sure, because I'm back and forth to the US. I'm probably over in the US every other month at the moment. So I'm over a lot to see our clients and to continue to build up my network and to do things like that, which can be challenging for sure, especially when you have a young child at home. But I think the UK is too small of a market to be a single market. For a company to only focus on one market, I think the UK is too small of a market to do that in. I mean, I think you could potentially do that in larger markets like the US or potentially China as well. China is also a massive market, but to only focus and only sell in the UK, I think hog ties you a bit, because it's a very small market. And, once you've met all those brands or talked to all those brands, and if you're in a specific industry that's very easy to do relatively quickly, you then don't have many other options. So you do have to start thinking a little bit bigger.
Mm-hmm. So can you walk me through your go-to-market strategy? What is your playbook?
Yeah, I mean, I think a go-to-market strategy, it depends. So CopyHouse, we're a service-based industry, right? So the go-to-market strategy that I would create for like a product-based company is going to be a little bit different, but it is about understanding that market and understanding the needs in that market. And that might involve, changing your proposition or changing your messaging slightly. So, for example, we really started to talk more about traditional industries and move away from technology when we went into the U.S. because, in the U.S., there's a lot more financial services, insurance, more traditional firms than there are perhaps here. So, changing the messaging, understanding the audience. So normally this involves refreshing the messaging that you may already have. The other thing that you can do once you have that is to do competitor analysis. So look at who you're competing against in that market, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, how you can kind of use those insights to gain a competitive advantage. And then using the insights from the core messaging paired with a competitor analysis to set the marketing strategy. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going to be a test and learn because, the things that work in one market are not necessarily going to work in another. And I really caution brands against a lift and shift approach. I mean, you don't want to make the assumption that, one market is going to perform and work exactly like the other. And you may discover that things that work in one market don't work in another. So, for example, in the US, webinars and online events are far more popular than they are in the UK. In the UK, most people are around London. So because most people are around London, they can then do in-person things. They can then do in-person events. Where in the US, teams are much more distributed. The US is massive, so they're far more likely and far more used to jumping online to attend an event or to engage virtually. So, there are some key differences in the markets, even though they both speak English, even though they both, on the surface level and from an outsider may seem similar.
Are you focusing on specific states, or are you just going for the whole thing?
Yeah, we started in New York. So we do have clients outside of that. So we have a couple of clients on the West Coast. We have a couple of clients in Texas. But what is easier is to focus on one place. So what I did was I looked at where I had the biggest network. So I went onto LinkedIn and I looked at where I had the most contacts. Was it San Francisco or was it New York or was it LA? Where was it that I already had the strongest base, and then built from there. So most companies in the US are not national right away. So most companies start regional and then expand because the US is a really big place. So it's really hard to cover all of that. When we think about the UK and building a network, most people just spend a lot of time in London, going to events, all that kind of stuff, where, you would almost need to do that in 4, 5, 6 different cities in the US to cover the whole thing. So you need a lot of manpower. So if you don't have a lot of resources and a lot of budget to be able to be on the ground and be spending time and networking and socializing and doing marketing in each of these places, it's much better to be very specific and choose one and then build from there. So we chose New York because Chief, which I'm a member of, so Chief is a private members club for female executives. They're much bigger in the US and the UK, but they have 5 clubhouses in the US. They used to have one in London, but they have one of their clubhouses in New York. So I looked at where they had clubhouses where they already had a community and a network, and then looked at my own network and saw that I had the most connections, networks in New York. So we primarily focus on New York, though, that's not to say that we don't work with clients that are across the US, but all of our events, everything like that, where I go when I go to the US is New York. It's also easier from a time zone perspective because East Coast to the UK is only 5 hours. West Coast to the UK is 8 hours. So you want to maybe consider where your team is based as well. So at the moment, most of my team, I do want to hire in the US, but at the moment, most of my team is here in the UK. So if most of your team is in the UK, it's going to be easier to stick on the East Coast than it is to be able to go to the West Coast. So we considered some of the business practicalities and implications, but then also thought about it from a networking and community building perspective. Joining existing communities is always easier than, starting your own from the ground up. And that will, give you some connections, give you some insights, give you some advice into that market when you get started. But that was kind of our reasoning and our thought process behind it.
Okay. Well, you briefly mentioned the differences between the two markets, but Europe and obviously the UK and the US have different maturity levels. So did that affect your messaging?
Yeah, absolutely. The US is, they often say that the US and the UK are 2 countries separated by a common language. And that really, really, really could not be more true. The way that Americans work and what Americans expect and want and need and, the messages that are going to resonate with them could not be more different than the UK. It's shockingly different. The budgets in the US are much higher, but expectations are also a lot higher in the US. So, Americans know how to hustle and work really, really, really. And you got to question the mental health element of that, but they know how to work really, really, really hard. The attitude and approach is very different in the US. They don't, take off 2 months in the summer from work. They're working all of the time and they expect things quite quickly. And the expectations are higher, but they're also willing to pay a bit more for it, generally speaking.
In the pre-show, I also learned that US-based companies already account for quite a significant amount of your customers. And you already mentioned that your team is based in the UK, but it is still a remote team from what I understood. So you did so without a local US team. So what is your secret?
I mean, most things happen online these days. So, I mean, a lot of it has been built online. So, I mean, it's still networking and spending time. And then, I'm there every other month and hosting events. So, we may not have somebody on the ground every single day, but we do have people on the ground for the moments that matter. And I think, the current way of working in person really should be about special moments. It should be about workshops or, in-person events that you can't do online, where, a lot of the business as usual, catch-up calls, things like this can happen online. So, I mean, I don't think it's wildly difficult or impossible to expand into a market where you don't have a team on the ground. I mean, it's helpful to have people who are there often so that you can do some of that, like, nurturing and some of that relationship building that does work better offline than online, but you don't need somebody there every single day. I mean, my whole company is fully remote, so we've always been remote. We were set up in January 2020, so 3 months before the pandemic. And that's meant that we've always, had asynchronous working, and we've always worked remotely. And, that's not going to change now that the pandemic is, well, not over, but now that the lockdowns are hopefully over. So, I mean, we're quite used to working remotely, and a lot of the team, I've only met, once or twice in person before. And, that doesn't mean that we don't have a good relationship. My head of ops, who, is one of my best friends, who, joined the company as the fourth hire, and, I speak to every single day. We've probably only had, 10 or 12 or the last 4 years, like, times together in person, but, he is there always, so I would trust him to the end of the earth and back. So, I mean, you can have good relationships and not always be in person.
With that in mind, and if you take your own experience into account, what do you think are the core components of a successful market entry?
I think understanding the market and not making the mistake of using a strategy that you're using in a different market in that new market. You do have to approach it with a fresh mind and a fresh eye and really, expect that things are going to be different in a new market. So, you're not necessarily starting from the ground up because you understand a lot about the business and what's worked in other markets, but you are also starting from the ground up because you're new into that market.
So then when entering a new market, such as the US, would you say that the first thing to do is to focus on sales or to focus on marketing?
I mean, I think this is true always, even when you're not thinking about international expansion, but I think you always want to invest in your marketing first. I mean, I've seen so many companies that have invested heavily in sales and outbound and cold calling, cold sales, and, it never works. They never really get the results that they want. When they hire a salesperson and they don't have any marketing, that salesperson's often like sitting on their thumbs or like not having enough to do. Salespeople they can go out and get leads to a degree, but they also need to be fed them, and they need the touch points, especially in B2B. I mean, the B2B sales journey is 6 to 12 months on average. It might be longer than that as well for some companies. So you really need to think about how you're going to nurture somebody throughout that whole sales cycle. And most salespeople are only focused on the end part of that journey. And if you're only focused on the bottom of the funnel, then you have nothing feeding the top and the middle, so nothing actually gets to the bottom. Just like a funnel, if you don't put water in at the top, nothing's going to come out at the bottom. So, I think it's true outside of this conversation as well. It's not just about international expansion. It's always true that you should invest in your marketing before you invest in your sales, and by investing in your marketing, the sales will come.
So did you also use your existing customer base in the UK to then, strengthen your position in the US?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot of our clients are quite global as well. So, when they heard that we also knew and operated in the US, they then would introduce us to their US colleagues, and we could then sell into like a new department or into a new team. But, also credibility is the same regardless of like the market that you're working in. So, people want to see case studies and the results that you've achieved, and, whether you've secured, for example, a page 1 SEO ranking in one market. It's good indication that SEO and that you can do it in another market. So, I don't think I've ever had anybody say, oh, that's case studies like for a UK brand. Like, do you have this specific case study, but in the US? They do obviously want to know about your market experience when you are in the US. They want to know about your understanding of the market. But one of the things that's often quite attractive as well is that you understand the UK market and the European market. So you can help companies in the UK who want to expand into the US, and you can help companies in the US that want to expand into Europe. So, that expertise in and of itself is quite valuable. It is often something that they're looking for. So yeah, absolutely. You should always use everything that you can in your arsenal to strengthen your marketing, to strengthen the company.
Mm-hmm. So now, if you look back, is there anything you would do differently?
No, but I don't tend to have that mindset typically. So, I normally think about both the good things and the bad things that I've done and realize that where I am right now, I wouldn't be here if I didn't make that mistake or, take that path. So, I almost never look back on my life personally or professionally or with this and regret anything. What I do is, take insights and use it to tweak and refine the strategy, but the strategy wouldn't, you wouldn't know that didn't work if it hadn't have worked. So, it's all about testing and learning and, improving and constantly growing and, growing at yourself as an individual, but also where you are as a company. So it's really difficult to answer that question because my general mindset in life is not to have regrets, but to learn from, maybe things that didn't work. But I almost never keep tally of, I wish I had done that differently. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, the past and, what went right or what went wrong, but, think about where I am now and where I want to go in the future and what I know, what knowledge I have that I can use to get there.
So then if we actually reframe the question and then focus on that one thing that you learned from that move to the US, what would it be?
I think, I don't know that I learned anything particularly new, but it reinforced a lot of the things that I already knew. And for me, it brought back and reminded me of a lot of the cultural things that I knew deep within me but had forgotten about. So a lot of it has been a refresher of knowledge, I guess I would say, rather than new knowledge from scratch. But it really has certainly enforced the differences between the two countries and even just in the way of working, but also in mentality. Americans are so optimistic and positive, but are also quick to anger and are much more direct than here in the UK. I love both places, but I've kind of had the opportunity to relearn and get reacquainted with the US by running my business there. So it's been a bit of a nice personal journey for me as well. So yeah, I guess I would say that I haven't learned anything particularly new, but it's reminded me of some of the things that I did know, which I guess is one of the strengths of knowing that market and knowing a market that you're going into rather than going into a market brand new for the very first time.
So what's next for you and your team?
Yeah, so we're continuing to expand into the US and we have some really exciting things happening. So my book, Scaling Success, Building Brands That Break Barriers, which has a whole chapter on international expansion and creating a new marketing strategy for a new market, is coming out in the fall, which I'm really excited about. That's being produced by a US, New York-based publisher. So that's going to be launching in the US market. I'm also taking my podcast, Tech Marketers Uncorked, to a really big conference called Money 2020, which is happening in Vegas at the end of October. So I've got some really exciting events and speaking opportunities and my book coming out, which I'm really excited for. But all of this feeds into our plans for international growth and worldwide domination.
That's a good one. A bit scary, but all right. But then I guess we're done for the show today. But before you go, do you have a last piece of advice to share with our listeners. So like, is there any advice that you received that made you a better professional that you would like to share today?
I guess the best advice is to never be afraid to ask for coffee. I mean, I've learned a lot in my career by networking and spending time with other people and being curious about them and, asking questions and, finding out more about them. I would use that when expanding internationally to learn more about the market. So especially if it's a market you don't know about, just have 10, 15 coffees with people who do know that market, who are living in that market, and find out what's going on for them, what they're thinking about, what they care about, and this will really help influence and shape your strategy. So I've always been a big believer in networking and the power of a network. I love the saying, your network is your net worth, and I really believe that that's true. You can solve pretty much any problem with your network. So my advice to people is to always build their network.
All right. Well, Kathryn, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today, and really appreciate the honesty in your answers as well. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
And this concludes today's episode. I hope you learned a thing or two, and if you did, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. This podcast is brought to you by marketing agency Advance B2B. So if you're looking for a partner to assist you with strategic marketing and anything HubSpot, visit advanceb2b.com. And if you're still around to hear this, thank you for listening and take care.